Welcome, everyone, to the latest episode in the California Library Association Ursula Meyer Advocacy Fund Training Series. I'm your host, Paul Signorelli. We're going to have Ray James and Aaron Blumberg with us today, helping out on exploring the topic of the day. The slide you're seeing is the one and only slide we're putting up there. We don't want to bury you under PowerPoint. So this slide is primarily up for people watching the archived version on YouTube. With that in mind, I'm going to go silent for about 30 seconds. Count your blessings. It's the only 30 seconds of silence you're going to get. Please read through that, and when I think you've had enough time to finish that, we'll take the slide down and jump right into our work today. I promise silence, but we're not getting it because the doorbell keeps ringing. Fine. As you see at the bottom of that, we do have these things going on a monthly basis. Whenever we get the next one up, it'll be there on the upcoming programs list on the CLA site. YouTube channel link is there, and you can find it pretty easily by going on YouTube and just searching on California Library Association, where there's a playlist for the well over 24 episodes that we've done so far. All of them there for you as training resources. Feel free to use them for yourself. Put together your own advocacy training course by going to the ones that appeal to you, or use them in your own trainings if you want to cut snippets or actually show it to your own learners and then have conversations around it. And of course, if you want to donate to keep the series going, we're happy to have that. It's funded by a bequest that we received a few years ago, but the more the merrier. So support from you means a lot to us. And with that said, let me take down the slide. And without further interference or ado, I'm going to turn it over to Ray and Aaron, who are going to start off by telling you a couple of personal stories to set the tone, and then we'll get into the workshop part of the session. So Aaron or Ray, whoever wants to go first, you're on.
Go, Aaron.
Oh, I was going to save you to go. So for those of you that may have hopefully read my bio, I am formerly incarcerated, and I was a librarian before incarceration. I'm something of a unicorn in some regards because I came into the carceral system with all the knowledge of being a librarian in libraries and nonprofits. And so I entered into a system which is really an information wasteland, and worked with people that were dealing with what is coined by Dr. Elfreda Chapman, if you're familiar with her work. She coined the term information poverty, and that's something that is rampant with people in the carceral systems. And so I was incarcerated for 3 years here in Florida with the Florida Department of Corrections. And upon my release, my main purpose was to reconnect with the library world in any way that I could and advocate for those that are returning from incarceration. And so what I did initially was contact people that were with me throughout my incarceration, and were able to connect me with resources and people that are working. What I wasn't aware of until I was released was the updating of the library standards from the American Library Association. And so I made sure to get involved in that. And along with Ray, we were part of the teams that updated, and Ray was a very big part of that, updating the standards for the incarcerated and the detained. All along with that, I got involved with another nonprofit called Ithaca SNR, and where I am a grant advisor for grants for their justice initiatives, where they deal with a lot of topics in higher education in prisons, as well as library services in prisons and other carceral environments. So that is how I made sure that I got back involved in the library world post-incarceration. I'm also in the midst of doing a paper on prison literacy programs, and will hopefully, God willing, be accepted into a doctoral program where my plan is to study information needs of the incarcerated, and building the partnerships between library types, carcerals and public, academic, and special libraries, as well as nonprofit, which we have a full variety of representation here in the webinar today, which is great to see.
I was in the midst of a 70-month prison sentence at Big Spring Federal Correctional Institution when they began offering college classes, which I was eager to take. I really wanted to get my associate degree in prison. This particular class was a speech class, and we went in and everybody sat down. There were about 28 incarcerated people and the teacher, of course. And he said, all right, tonight's assignment is stand up and in 2 minutes, tell us what you're going to do after prison. Everybody had their turn and I finally got mine, and I stood up and said with some authority, I'm going to become a librarian. Well, everyone laughed. Literally everyone, particularly the teacher, everyone laughed. And it wasn't the first time someone laughed when I said I was going to become a librarian after prison. But I did eventually get released. And my supervisor, the RE, said, you need more realistic goals. You can't possibly become a librarian because you're too old. You don't have any money, and you can't get any student aid, and you're just not going to be able to fulfill that dream. So choose something a little more realistic. And I didn't. I persisted, and eventually I was accepted on a probationary measure for readmission to the University of Texas at Austin, and returned to school and received my bachelor's degree, applied to one graduate school, the University of Texas School of Information, and began going to classes. And it turned out my supervisor, my mentor, was Laureen Roy, and she was sympathetic. She understood what was going on with me. And eventually, she became president of the American Library Association. And she took me to Washington as a part of her presidential party. She said, there's some people I want you to meet. She introduced me to it was called the Prisoners Forum, which was the correctional or carceral librarians group. And they accepted me warmly. And eventually I became the first chair of the Prisoners Forum that was a formerly incarcerated person. So in this process, we did a number of things, and one of those was Diane Walden of Colorado asked me to help her write the Prisoner's Right to Read, which we did, and we managed to get that through the process. And in learning the process, I became involved in the process with the Intellectual Freedom Committee and the Intellectual Freedom Roundtable and the Freedom to Read Foundation of the American Library Association. So, long story short, I received a Roll of Honor from the Freedom to Read Foundation, which I consider a high honor, along with Judy Bloom and Frank Zappa. The work with the IFC has led me to I am the chair of the Intellectual Freedom Committee this year. And I've also been a director of the Intellectual Freedom Roundtable. I was attending an IFRT meeting, and there was a woman from Australia there who wanted to talk about improving the IFLA standards. And I volunteered. And she let me in, and I ended up writing a large section of the 4th edition of the Intellectual Freedom Standards. And shortly after that, the American Library Association said, you know, it's been since 1992 that we updated the library services for the incarcerated or detained standards. It's time we did that, and we started that process. And over 2 years, hundreds of people were involved, but I was one of 5 project managers. And this summer, the final document was printed, and with the help of Mellon Foundation, of course. And Mellon is in the process of sending free copies of the standards to up to 2,000 carceral institutions. Some people have to ask for it, and they can do that still. And the standards are now the standard that we would like to see carceral institutions aspire to. That's it. Any other questions? Any questions?
So before we take questions, Ray, I just want to jump in as we'll do throughout the workshop here and point out, Ray's just pointed out through his own story, one of the primary things that help Ray, help Aaron, and so many other people that are trying to transition out of the situation they're in and back into the communities that they want to be part of and that they have been part of. And there's that sense of belonging. Ray was asked by Laureen to be part of what she was doing. I've seen Laureen in action. She does that consistently. Has been doing that for decades. She will look at people who will benefit from her intervention, from her support them to the best of their ability, and then they pass it on, as Ray is passing on, as Aaron's passing it on today. So as advocates, the first thing we want to do is look around at the people we're trying to support and trying to advocate for and make those personal connections. Help give them a place where they can tell their stories. Help make this a real issue for people so that we see people rather than labels. And that's the starting point for our conversation today. Ray has asked for questions, so let's go there. And then I want to do an exercise with all of you to prime the pump a little bit more. But first of all, any questions for Ray about what he's done or how you can advocate on behalf of Ray and others like him that benefit from your support?
I have a question.
Please.
They're building a new jail in our county, and they're going to have 11 classroom spaces. And I wanted to know what kind of programming you think would be beneficial to have available.
That's there right now.
Any programming is beneficial as long as it emphasizes the belonging of incarcerated people. I would also urge you to contact Freedom Reads, which is a group led by R. Dwayne Betts, which provides libraries in jail cells, in prisons and jails in the United States. They can bring in books, and they can bring in programs. There's another program called Radical Reversal, which is working to bring audiovisual programming to produce audiovisual programming in carceral facilities. So there are things available, but the main thing is to prepare currently incarcerated people for reentry. The reentry programs, which are mentioned in numerous locations in the standards, are essential. You have to tell people what to expect, because even from my own perspective, it's not easy. It's hard to find a job. It's hard to find a place to live. Those things are difficult, and those are the basic things. And you need to prepare through reentry training those programs.
Yeah, and I would follow up the main thing that is the main thing that's lacking in programming, at least here in Florida, are literacy classes.
This coffee is just going cold.
So, and when I say literacy, I mean, besides basic literacy skills, which there is a lack in that. You want to have classes on digital literacy. You want classes on information literacy. And these are all skills that are needed when we enter into society. You have the potential of having formerly incarcerated patrons that have been incarcerated for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, etc. And the longer in the gaps, we know how technology changes. So getting them those skills, especially in your case, when you're talking about a brand new jail being built, is there any kind of communication between the local library system and that jail? Are you building those partnerships? And I think that's important if you don't have that connection to start creating that connection, because you have, like you said, you're having this institution with a lot of classrooms that can be used. How can the library help with that? How can we ensure that you create that connection so they know that, you know, fulfill their incarceration, that they can go and continue on with their education through your library system?
Aaron, you mentioned those community groups. Can you give a couple of examples of groups that our colleagues on the session today can pursue in their own communities to build those collaborations?
So there's a lot of organizations that you may not be familiar with within your own communities. I know here in Florida, we had multiple organizations that I wasn't aware of because I wasn't incarcerated at the time, but while being I learned about these pro incarcerated people. You know, this is Florida called Florida Cares, and they keep an eye and ear out on legislation that directly affects the incarcerated. And so when we talk about the other states, you know, I'm sure California has a number of organizations like that. And even just your community, you know, your local community organizations in general, you know, and your various departments. Are you, as a library, are you selling yourself off in the other departments? Are you connected with the social services department? Are you connected in such a way that you have an embedded social worker in your library? Are you building these connections? You know, more often than not, libraries tend to silo themselves, and whether by on purpose or accidental, it's just a function of it. Especially when we talk about prison libraries, they're extremely siloed. I'm sure a lot of the prison librarians here on the call can acknowledge that. You know, are you aware of your community and what it offers? You know, again, post-incarceration, I find out about these organizations here within my own county I wasn't aware of. And so we want to make sure that we're always aware of our communities. I know, especially public libraries, you try to be aware of your communities and you try to build those connections of your patrons if you don't know who is in your service base, your service areas. So just be cognizant of that. And, you know, your outreach departments, obviously, they are a resource. They have, you know, you can especially solid relationships with the community because they're doing these outreach resources. So if you're someone that's not in an outreach position, get to know your outreach library staff, get to know who they have access to, ask them for some possibilities. And obviously, of course, our legislative offices, you know, your local reps, your local senators, et cetera.
Michelle Fisher has a question.
Okay, so let's start with Michelle, and then we'll go to Christine.
Yeah. So one of the things that I've noticed is, especially with prisons, they take people out of their communities where they have connections and you're kind of physically distant from where you may end up after you're out. And so I'm wondering, are there opportunities for folks working in areas maybe where there isn't a prison located in the area where we can get information about like doing more directed outreach, or I guess on the other side, like folks working inside pointing people who are going through reentry to more specific resources in the communities that they're going to be reentering into, kind of addressing that. You're probably not getting out of prison and then immediately going to be in the community where the prison is located issue.
Right. And where are you coming from, Michelle?
I'm in Wisconsin, actually. Someone shared this with me, but I'm just curious about like strategies or ideas that we might be able to use if there's not prisons like directly in our communities, but we know people are coming back into our communities and going through reentry.
Right. I'm not sure how Wisconsin handle things. Here in Florida, you know, before we are released, we're supposed to let them know where we're released to. So within an area that has a local prison, the possibility is, of course, that you'll have someone that used to live there will be returning to that once post-incarceration. And it really depends. I would say if you're not in contact with your local Department of Corrections or county Department of Corrections, for lack of a better term, get involved in that. Create those connections. I know, again, I'll be drawing on Florida because that's where I am. But Florida has a database where they don't initially say, you know, so-and-so is returning to such and such area, but it has a map. And based on the information that's given to the Department of Corrections, they can put a little dot on the map that says this is, you know, a person who's formerly incarcerated, has been released, and this is where they're living. So that might be something to look at. If it doesn't exist, maybe that's something that Wisconsin would want to look into. Not that, you know, it's just you're aware of your community. You know, how many formerly incarcerated live in my community, and what could I be doing about that?
For those watching the archive version of this, we've got another comment in the chat, and this one gives us the resource, which is jumping a little bit, so I need to move my chat up so I can read that to you. It said a lot of carceral institutions now will have some sort of reentry staff member there. That may be a good contact to ask about local reentry resources. Obviously, this can be very hit or miss. There's another one for you. Ray, did you want to add anything before we go on to Christine?
Yes, I did want to add something. The American Library Association has dedicated itself to providing resources for incarcerated and formerly incarcerated people. There is a group called Library Services for the Justice Involved, which is a part of ALA. However, you do not have to be a member of ALA to get their listserv, which has an abundance of resources and meetings, including the San Francisco Public Library, which is doing yeoman work right now for this process. So you can join their listserv, which is called Prison-L, and in fact, if you just do Prison-L, it'll take you to it. Be careful, there's a Prison-L for IFLA too, which is also good, but it's nothing like the Prison-L for the US. And this will put you in contact with people who are working in the field or who have questions or have interests. The important thing is to gather information, and that can be done without anyone's assistance. You can start, for want of a better word, doing that topic, and you'll find an abundance of resources. And as far as a personal note, I wanted to welcome Michael McLaughlin, who lives in Arizona, but for a number of years, he went into California prisons to teach literacy. And I'm in awe of him. And I think any of the California incarcerated people or even staff that remember Michael should agree with me on that. Thank you.
Thanks, Ray.
Christine, you want to go ahead?
How about now? Can you hear me now?
Absolutely.
Perfect. Just have to, I'm used to using the Teams, and so Zoom is a little bit foreign to me. So I work in a prison that's a level 4 prison in California called Sacramento, which is not actually in Sacramento. We're about 20 miles from Sacramento in the town of Folsom. There's 2 prisons that share property. One is Folsom Prison, which is pretty famous. We're kind of tucked behind. We share the property. We're an entirely different prison. And only knows why they had to pick Sacramento Prison, right? There's so many names we could have chosen, but that is it. So we're not actually there. That said, I've been a professional librarian for 20 years. I've worked for the public library for a good majority of my career, academic library, and then 8 years for a prison library, one for a different prison, and now currently here for 3 years. So I have the breadth of experience to kind of compare across different fields, right? And one of the things that prison libraries, I think it was Aaron mentioned that we're kind of silos. We're kind of behind the wall. It's easy to forget about us. We may not be everybody's dream job, but we try to reach out and explain we have good benefits. And if you're really interested in moving the football down the field rather than just reading Little Red Riding Hood, to children, not that that's not important. I was changed as a children's librarian, but really transforming lives from I'm a gang infested situation and I have no skills to get out because I had early trauma. I'm, in an addicted situation to where they have job skills and they can retool their lives for when they get out. 95% of our population will eventually get out. So that they can be productive members of the community, helps the community, it saves money. It also helps that individual tremendously, gives them a sense of pride, teaches them essentially what their parents maybe should have taught them, right? How to function as an adult. So we're trying to transform ourselves the way the public library in California has, which is we used to have wonderful programs, but we wouldn't tell anybody about them. And we were terrible at marketing. We had all these wonderful free things. So we got better at, instead of being a homework center at the public library, we were an information center. We started having programs and online access and digital resources and things. And so really transformed the way that the public library serves the public. We're kind of at that crossroads right now with the prison libraries in California. So we're trying to mimic more of what like the public library can do, in that we can be a resource wherever they parole in California, because there's a public library wherever they go, right? We can be part of that reentry package for them. So we don't have to know where they're paroling. Go find your public library. So we have to instill value in the library and teach them that they can go to the library when they're on their way out. And they can also build community while they're still in prison. The library is not just 15-year-old stale books that didn't get stolen because nobody wants to read them, and a place to sue your custody officer and access to the court to maybe file a habeas. We can be so much more. So one of the things that we're working on is bringing more programming, particularly virtual programming, because we have a pretty tough population. So we have done LexisNexis legal database training online through our ViewSonic. So that's one thing, right? Trying to bring something that the users are interested in. We're doing PBS documentaries. For Point of View is the longest running documentaries in, I think, the nation, right? And building community by having events where they come to the library, they watch a movie, they talk about the feelings of the protagonist. And these are hard-hitting documentaries. We just watched one on a nursing home where the residents were former incarcerated people that had become paralyzed because they were shot while they were drug dealing, and how they were abandoned during COVID by the system, and trying to be reaching out saying, we still matter, we still have talent, we still want to engage with our families. It's like we're in prison all over again. And so I actually had inmates, and these are tough inmates, crying in the audience because they so connected to this PBS documentary. I got you, man. I feel you, that kind of thing.
Christine, let me interject here something that I don't want to miss too much. And the stories you're telling are an integral part of what we're trying to get across today. If we're going to be advocating for people that are incarcerated or are recently released, the stories are so important. And the passion with which Christine is telling those stories is an essential example to all of us. Now we can proceed. Christine, I want to make sure that we're getting a few other comments in here. So hold your thoughts, come back to those if you don't mind in a few minutes, but let's catch up on chat. And Michelle had her hand up again. Well, something that's in chat here, for those of you that are listening to the recorded archive version, what we're hearing here is kind of similar to the LSII listserv. There's a small online community of practice through something called the Ready Access Project for library workers. And I'm sorry, my chat just jumped. Aaron, can you see that and finish reading that part of it?
Yeah, someone had just replied to it. Ready Access Project for library workers that meets on Zoom monthly for mutual support and brainstorming.
Wonderful. And then we've got a question anonymously that somebody wanted to pose, I guess, to the panelists and other people in the program. The question here is about people's experiences with partnering with prison librarians. Are there efforts to bridge the gap of connections of librarians wanting to connect with prison librarians? There's a couple of others, but let's focus first of all of what are your experiences with partnering with prison librarians, and is there an effort to bridge that gap of connections? Start with Ray and Aaron, anything you know, and then anybody else that wants to jump in via chat or come on audibly so we can explore that together.
Yes, the community is growing and is growing interested. San Francisco Public Library, which I've mentioned a number of times, has a monthly meeting of people who are interested in the topic, and their most recent meeting was the largest yet. There are large numbers of public librarians becoming interested in doing work with prison or incarceral librarians too. I think that we had a meeting at the ALA in San Diego, and there were like 200 people there. We used to have programs at ALA and have 20 if we were lucky. So more and more people are becoming interested in this topic. And I am particularly encouraged by the number of public librarians who say, yeah, what can I do? How do I go about it? And there are a number of ways to do that. I would like to point out, like something like in New York, consortia and public libraries are required by law to provide services to carceral facilities in their state. I would like to see that happen more. I mean, that's a wish of mine, is that states, if you're a public library and there's a prison in your district, then in your service area, then you have to establish some kind of relationship. But before that's mandatory, I think there are many people who are going about doing that. It's just encouraging to me. Aaron might have something else.
Yeah, so just on the flip side of things, Ray was talking about public libraries and their partnerships with the carceral ones. But we also, and I'm going to say this because I know we have a number of academics on the call as well, and that had registered. And so also be aware that we don't want to leave you guys out. Academic librarians or academic staff in general can and should be interacting with the carceral libraries as well. I have a friend who lives in Michigan. She works for the Michigan Department of Corrections as a prison librarian, as does her husband. And she partnered with the University of Michigan's prison writing project to create a writing class and a program within her prison library. And it was really powerful for her patrons, and it was powerful for the students that were involved from the University of Michigan. And so, when we talk about returning to from incarceration, or even within, we want to tell our story. We want to be heard. Want to have the ability and the skills to be able to tell our stories in new ways, and to be able to, great Sybil, be able to, ensure that when we return, we can feel comfortable talking about ourselves, talking about our stories. And I know that's something that a lot of, myself included, especially when we return from incarceration, we want to be able to reclaim our narratives. We want to be able to tell our stories in such a way that it's not traumatizing for us. And the more we talk about it, the easier it becomes. And the more important it becomes for us to be able to tell our stories. And especially, again, when we talk about academia, you know, the academics will have formerly incarcerated students. How are you enabling them to fulfill their educational goals? Are you creating the safe space? Are you ensuring that, you know, they feel safe coming into your library, that you're providing the same skills? The same thing with the public libraries. Are you creating that safe space? It's so important. And again, I brought up social workers being embedded in the libraries. That's so important. Are the public librarians connecting with social services? Are your academic librarians connecting with the departments that fulfill that same need? Are you creating, again, that safe space? It's so important for anyone returning from incarceration.
Thanks, Aaron. Thanks, Ray. Ivory, before I turn to you, there's one more part of the question that I was pursuing with the chat question I got. This is directed back to Christine. Christine, do you have suggestions? This is one of your peers asking this. Do you have suggestions on how to connect with prison librarians who have not been open to partnerships in the past?
Is this the Christine you're speaking to?
Yes.
There's two of us.
Okay.
I would forward, Brandy is on this call. She's the principal librarian for the state of California. I'm going to redirect that to her because she is my boss. So I'm sure she has some thoughts on the matter.
Wonderful. Brandy.
Brandy, could you answer that question?
Yeah, sure. Thanks everyone for having us. I know that a lot of this is aimed at folks that are already been released into the community, but there are several several California prison librarians on the call who are interested in forming those relationships. Christine mentioned that we're sort of at a crossroads with the department, moving into more of a public library model. So some of those people that might have been reluctant in the past to work with you, I would reach out again, frankly. And I'm happy to put my contact information in the chat, and I can coordinate, you know, conversations between folks also. Does that answer the question?
I believe it does. I'll watch for chat in case there's a follow-up there. Ivory, let's
Okay.
go with you.
Did you call me, Paul?
Yes, please.
Okay, I wasn't sure if I heard correctly. So I'm actually don't work in the library system. I'm an occupational therapist, but I'm really fascinated with and a big fan of the library system and how they can kind of integrate into the social prescribing movement, which is connecting people with community resources. And this is often funded through health insurance, but to impact people's wellness at the community level. So my question is kind of two-part. A, I'm wondering when people are released, do they even have health insurance as part of my question? But B, you know, I know there's a lot of, you know, prison writing classes and art classes and things. And Ray really spoke about this need for belonging, which I think doesn't go away when someone's released to the community. So are there examples of being linked to writing classes and art classes in the community to really kind of facilitate belonging upon release is the second part of the question.
All right, I'll talk about the first part. So as far as health insurance, the Affordable Care Act allows you, I think, within 6 months of moving from incarceration to apply for health insurance through the ACA market. I didn't realize Florida is really bad. I don't think anyone's on Florida from here. Florida is really bad about reentry and making you aware, at least in my case, about reentry stuff, especially when it comes to social services, which is why I'm always advocating, especially here in Florida, for these partnerships to happen. But especially in Florida, it needs to come from the outside. So the public librarians of Florida need to, you know, push for the connections and the partnering with the carceral system here. And it's even more so because the state of Florida does not have carceral librarians embedded in their prison libraries. They don't. More often they are library techs with no library background. And so it's a little harder, especially here in Florida, to create those connections. So that said, when I came out and I was like, I should probably get some health insurance, I was a little too late on the uptake to benefit from the ACA. And then do you have anything to add on that, Ray? On
Yeah,
like that?
Yeah, I agree with insurance is one of the issues, I mean, housing, food, acquiring insurance, and that's difficult for many people because they don't understand how they have to go, what they have to do, what their instructions are. There isn't a sheet of paper that says, here's how you do this. I taught in prison, I taught a life skills class. And I think that kind of a program, if this is peer-to-peer life skills training in prison, the key there is to get people. I don't know, you never know who the prisoners, the incarcerated people really are. But if you could find a bank president to teach financial management, who is in the carceral institution, more and more people would listen and believe him because he's a bank president or a former bank teller or something like that. That's the key, and that's a part of belonging too, is to find people you can connect with. That can happen in prison, but it also can happen out of prison. I would think a public library which is welcoming to formerly incarcerated people, could do this very easily. They could say, okay, on our library board or whatever, we know a bank president, we know an insurance agent, we know this, who will come for free, because it has to be for free. You can't charge people for this, to come and to teach that. And if the public library is welcoming enough and creates the safe space enough, then people will, formerly incarcerated people will come to the library, and then they will be exposed to these programs. It's just a great way to go. It's always teaching life skills in and out.
Again, if as advocates we're looking for guidance here on how to approach this, without even trying to look for this kind of stuff, as I was thinking about today's session, I came across a book that I just finished reading, new release by Timothy Snyder. It's called On Freedom. He's a historian, wonderful writer. And throughout the book, Snyder, in talking about freedom, talks about some of the workshops that he's done in prison, which opens up our eyes to the idea that there are quite a few people that are willing to offer that level of programming. Another mentor of mine, Margot Perrin, years ago, was doing some prison work, and she actually did a book. I put the link in the chat. It's called Only the Dead Can Kill, Stories from Jail, where she was working to inspire people who are incarcerated to write their stories, and she managed to pull together a whole collection of those things. So my point to you is that given the ability we have to contact people through social media and through the people we know, friends of friends, start dreaming about the people you'd like to see in your prison. Think about the possibility, if you can do it within the incarcerated situation, to actually bring people in via Zoom. It doesn't have to be a geographically located person that comes in and leads those workshops. But the stories that Snyder tells, and the stories that I've heard from Margot and many others tell us, you have a big prospective group out there willing to work with you. And the starting point is just to dream and ask. Michelle, you got your hand up.
Yes. But what about this guy?
Is he staying till?
No.
He's leaving now?
He should be.
Okay.
Because I don't know. They were gonna maybe do pass, but it doesn't
We
look
get
like.
somebody who's got background sound on there. If you can mute yourself, that would be great. Michelle, you want to go ahead?
Where's this again? Okay, hey, yeah. My name's Michelle. I am, let me do my.
Yeah. Well, we saw you for a second.
Okay. I actually work for Yolo County Public Library here in California. And we go into the, we're not the prison, but the jail here in Yolo County. and I do library 101 classes, and I partner with social services with their homeless coordinator and stuff like that, and bring all that information in with the library 101 classes. And I also bring out, like, you know, different people that know how to work, you know,
So scan it.
like the education, like reading and stuff is great, but sometimes, you know, we want to bring in like art and stuff like that. And I bring in like the 3D printer so they can see how it's working and stuff like that. We did partner with our Yellow Arts partner here in Woodland, California, and they did a series called ICU, and it's really a focus to with homelessness, people that are experiencing homelessness. And a lot of that was our people that were in the probation that are coming out of jail because they don't have a place to go. So they were able to go into these programs, get a free meal, have a art class with this art teacher that was in the program.
Staring at it, it doesn't.
And
Okay, there it is.
that was about, I think it was like a 2-year program. So that was a really good way to integrate the arts.
Thank you so much. Response from Lauren at this point.
So I wanted to chime in. This is Michael McLaughlin from Prescott, Arizona. I worked as an artist in residence in 5 California prisons for 22 years and taught poetry, screenplay, and fiction writing. And I'm in a state which in a number of ways is probably not as progressive as California. They don't really have the infrastructure of an arts and corrections infrastructure here. And Prescott is about 2.5 hours from the nearest prison. That said, I'd really like to implement sort of a little arts and corrections program, specifically poetry, in the prison here. And I'm just wondering, in terms of a prison point person, who might I connect with? What kind of people make the best connections in libraries for these kinds of programs? And you know, I could fathom I could guess at the answer, but I would really anyone with input, with some good that could help me. I'll put it this way: I'd really appreciate it. Because I just talked to the director of corrections in Arizona. They don't have any programming. And of course I wanted to do some sort of token pay for it. But statewide, all they could really consider was volunteer work. So, I mean, I don't mind volunteering in my local community, but I was hoping I could launch something. I had more ambitious dreams. So anyway, that's a little bit about me and a little bit about what I'm looking for. If anybody could respond, that would be great. Thank you.
Michael, you already have a response in the chat, which is Christine asking if you can give her your contact information because she wants to talk to you.
Okay, will do.
Again, I can't emphasize enough that a session like this is much more than us just sharing resources and information, which we're trying our best to do as quickly as we can, but also you sharing information with each other and establishing contacts. If you walk away from today's session and do a follow-up with somebody that you met here, and that results in the kind of advocacy that we're supporting, we've been successful. If all we do is just talk and say, okay, that sounds good, and then we go home. It was sweet, but it doesn't really get there. So let us advocate for ourselves, actually taking these actions, making these contacts, and doing the kind of thing that you just saw between the speaker and another person saying, yeah, send me your contact information. I can do that. Michelle, did you have any follow-up? Because your hand's still up. You're muted.
No, maybe it's the other Michelle. There's 2 of us, I think.
Okay. So if there's another Michelle with a hand up that wants to speak, let's go to that now.
I just wanted to ask Ivory, there was a second part to your question. Did it get answered at any point?
Yeah, it was kind of thinking of and this is such a big picture idea. It's not really like specifically how would this happen, but I'm just throwing this out there. I'm wondering if there was a prison to library pipeline, right? Where people that were transitioning out of incarceration were referred to the library if they wanted to, and then connected with not just support for housing and food and those basic material needs, but also groups that facilitate belonging, whether that's art or nature or, you know, different types of kind of groups that we know impact people's wellness and sense of belonging. So I'm just throwing out that idea of kind of a prison to library pipeline.
I can
how-
address this. There are a number of public libraries who work with carceral institutions, and when the incarcerated person has completed the reentry and is being sent home, they are given a library card. And that library card says, this is where it is, these are the hours, this is how to get in touch with it. And some of them have even gone so far as to provide a contact person in the public library. So, you know, obviously not every prison does it, but many prisons and public libraries are working together in this way to provide the public library access once the incarcerated person is out in the community. I think it's just a terrific way to go about it. I know that when I was released, I was like totally bewildered about how to go about a number of things. Because, you know, I was in prison from roughly the beginning of the internet age to when it was fairly well developed. And if it had not been for the Austin Community College Public Library, I would still be lost, I think. But anyway, that was one place I was allowed to go. So I went, and they said, this is how you use the computers. And, you know, it was amazing. I got my name without any numbers for Hotmail and Gmail and Yahoo. It's pretty miraculous, you know, to get your name without that, with all that. They provided that. They also provided information about getting employment and things like that. Community colleges are often the best resource. Public libraries can be. Austin Public Library was a very good resource too. The key there is that you don't know which library is going to provide that access unless you're told before you leave prison what library or what institution will provide that help. But just think about establishing a relationship. I'm not even sure you need the permission from anyone to do that, but just establish a relationship so that the incarcerated person on release gets a library card.
Aaron, anything
Yeah.
good?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up. We're probably going to talk at some point. I'm just going to bring it up now. So I wanted to specifically highlight something that's in the brand new standards that Ray was a major part of, and that is entry 1.9, which is talking about services and specifically reentry. And so I'm just going to read the paragraph for 1.9 reentry. Incarcerated or detained users should leave their facility with a connection to a public library in their community or the local school district library as appropriate. Carceral library staff should encourage people exiting the carceral environment to begin or continue a relationship with public libraries and should provide information to individuals about how to access library services once released, including enabling those leaving prison to do so with a library card in hand. Public libraries should coordinate with carceral library staff to provide outreach to recently released people. So obviously that's a big picture. Love to see it everywhere, but it's good to have it in print form and it's being sent out to the carceral libraries across the nation. And if you're a public library that wants to see it, we encourage you to ask for a copy. Like it brought up earlier, 2,000 free copies are being sent to carceral libraries. That's not to say that a public library can't also benefit from that free copy.
Aaron, thanks for the transition. I was wanting to get us over to that topic because one of the things we want to do is make sure people in this session today hear at least a few of the critically important things in those revisions that can guide them and help them and support them in their efforts to be advocates for the incarcerated and those recently released. Ray and Aaron, you want to hit a few of those that you think are most important and most useful to advocates?
I think the key to the standards is to realize they are not mandatory. They're not, we can't do it, can't mandate it, can't make people do it. These are ideas. If someone wants to have a carceral library that meets the needs of the incarcerated, then this book is a guide. But if they don't, nothing's going to make them do it. There are so many people who don't believe that incarcerated people deserve a library or television or exercise, and there's nothing nothing we can do about it. However, the standards are laid out. So this is the basic, this is the intermediary, and this is the aspirational. These are the standards where we would like to go. In particular, in that is the aspiration to have complete internet access, or at least partial internet access, or at least digital training while incarcerated. The other aspects of this of these standards are that we specifically, but without deliberate naming, made the standards for women, for non-citizens, for gay and people, but as well as youth and the aged. We feel like that if these standards can meet the needs of all of that group of incarcerated people, make them aware of that, the library is going in the carceral institution is going to be more aware of these people and provide all of the assistance that they need.
Aaron, you want to hit a few that you think are really important and useful to people?
Sure. So just to fix what I said, what I read is part of the access portion, not program services. But there is a program and services portion, which we talk about work training and reintegration or reentry skills. And it gives what ALA sees as the important skills when it comes to job seeking information sessions, informational programs that highlight educational resources, and presentations and workshops with the local community members. It all goes back to, again, creating these partnerships, these collaborations with the various library types. And I see Brandy with her hand up, and I'm sure she's someone that wants to push for these kind of things, I'm sure. And so the biggest thing when it comes to any carceral environment in general is just the accessibility. Is it accessible to your patrons? And that's of both the physical accessibility as well as the virtual accessibility. And by physical, I mean, does your library space, is it accessible to all? And regardless, we know there's a very great aging population in our carceral systems. Is your library accessible to those that have a physical impairment? Are they accessible to those that may have invisible disabilities? Are your collections accessible? Does your collection reflect your patrons? Here in Florida, there is no budget for library, anything, library services, library materials. The library where I was housed had a collection that was purely donation based. And so it reflected the wants and the needs of the person that was donating the materials. It was, thank God, a very broad and a spectrum of genres and books, but the nonfiction materials were lacking. They were old, and they were things that may have been there 20, 50 years. I know I saw one book that was probably copyright in the 1960s. So is it accessible anymore? No. Is the information changed? Of course. So we want to make sure that, again, we want accessible materials. And that's where another thing of collaborating with your public libraries. Are your public libraries, when you deselect or weed, whichever term you use, your materials, what happens to those materials? Is it a reason? Is the reason for deselection because it's out of date? Then you probably don't want to be donating that to any place really, but especially the carceral environment. Like I brought up when I first introduced myself, information poverty is very real, and having a collection that is severely out of date is just perpetuating that information poverty. So we want to get people out of that information wasteland. We want to make them aware of the materials that are available to them. They should be available to them now while they're incarcerated, and that availability and accessibility needs to continue when they return.
Ray, any follow-up?
Nope.
So let's go back to Q&A. Brandy.
Thank you so much. Let me figure out how to lower my hand. I'm also more familiar with Teams. There we go. My question was about the standard suggesting that folks leave the institution with a library card. In California, I've tried a couple times to meet with various systems about getting how we could do that warm handoff, how a library card could be given to somebody. And we've run into a couple barriers, and I just wondered if other people had any thoughts. The biggest barrier is something someone brought up earlier, which is that people don't release back into the community where their institution is housed. So, for example, I met with Los Angeles County Library, and they have an institution in their county, and they were interested in getting library cards to the people at that institution, but those people are not necessarily going back to Los Angeles County when they're out. I've often thought that California should have some sort of universal library card, some way that we could do some. Thank you, Ray. I appreciate that. But I don't know how to make that happen. But that's been my biggest barrier with getting people a library card before they leave. The best we can do right now is tell them, go to your library, that your library has resources for you. I guess that's all I wanted to say. I wondered if people had thoughts on that.
And while people are responding to that, Michelle.
Let me lower my hand too. I want to just respond with the library card. When I do the library 101 classes, I actually bring library cards in and I have them fill out applications and I give them a library card right there. So they can have it in their hand, and I just tell them, it won't be active until later this afternoon until I can get back and put all this stuff in, all their information in. And sometimes they don't have addresses and stuff, but luckily our system has been don't have any barriers for that. We still, they can still get their library card. We also partner with we have a program here in Yolo County called Yolo Reads. So literacy. So if these people in the probation reentry program, if they're doing like their GED or high school diploma, we can offer to get them tutors, and tutors will actually meet them at the probation department, or they will meet them at the library here in our county. So we offer those kind of services for them to have more support. I also want to mention that at the beginning of every class that I do, I always ask them a question. I ask them, what was your perspective when you were younger, when you were in school? What was your first library experience? And that gets them really thinking about, okay, what was my first library experience. A lot of them say, well, I was kicked out of the library. The librarian was, she was an older, white lady. She didn't look like me. And, we're becoming we are more of a community hub than just a library. So we are a community center, and I always want to let them know that, they're always welcome. We are very diverse now. People behind the desks are very diverse. Myself, I'm very different than the typical, what they think a library person that works in a library looks like. I'm not a librarian, but I'm a library associate, but I've been working in libraries for about 14 years. So this part of the population is really important to me. And, having family with going through things and stuff. So this helps me connect to that community, and also to let them know that we understand how they're feeling and everything, so we can give them all the tools to help them.
Michelle, can you offer one or two tips that you're currently using to give people that sense of belonging and to engage them with what you do?
Can you ask that question one more time? I'm sorry.
Yeah. One or two tips from you on things that you're currently doing that you think are successful in giving people that sense of belonging and engaging them in what you're doing.
At first, when I come into my classes, they're like, oh, you gotta listen to her. What's she offering? I think a lot of times I make sure that I'm very, I have up-to-date information. So like, for instance, a lot of times they don't know they can go to our law library, and there's services offering for them that for their cases or whatever, but they don't know that. So we want to always make that aware for them that anybody can go to a law library. It's not just for certain people, not for lawyers, but it's also for the public too. I think that's an important thing. Also, just for me to get them interested in like what I'm saying is like, I give them examples, and I also I point towards like story time for families. Also getting into like the population that speak only Spanish, trying to get what our services that are for Spanish speakers, and stuff like that. I think that it's just very important to listen instead of talking down, and hearing their stories too, because you can learn a lot from them.
Piggybacking on what you just said, first of all, that point of what somebody said earlier in the session, marketing ourselves. We need to get better at that. And what you're talking about is making people aware of what's there that they don't already know about. And that's the low-hanging fruit. We don't have to go create new things. We just have to make them more aware of it. Somebody in chat just made a comment along those same lines about bringing people's attention to what's out there. I think it's Mallory says, I did some outreach at a women's prison recently. We gave them our library's reference email address, mailing address, and said that if they wrote us, we'd look up the local library info for the city they'd be released in. So this is us being proactive, not having to do anything beyond what we normally do, which is providing information. But as Dave Lanke so often says, making our collections and our materials useful and productive to the people that use them, rather than just being a source for people going to, do you know this? Do you know that? It's us anticipating, matching the information with the person, which takes us back to library traditions for over a century now. Looks like Christine has her hand up. Let's go for that one.
So one of the things that I would share with you, since you're asking for things that are successful, that have worked well, because we tried some things that were not, right? So you have to be willing to fail. But I have a senior librarian, in fact, she's on this call, Andrea Hubbard, and she's got a number of innovative concepts that we've tried. One of the things that we've done is start what I call a flag program, a Friends of the Library Advisory Group. So the 60-year-old fat white supremacy, what are you gonna, that perspective of, I don't have the same experience of a athletic, black from a socioeconomic same background, right? So we built a team, and we meet every other month of incarcerated folks to give them a sense of community. This is their library, and formed a committee and said, what do you think? What kind of books should we buy? What would you like to read? You know, can you be our ambassador for your housing unit and ask around and see what kind of programming people want to have, and give us some feedback. Maybe you could carry some surveys out there, you know, make suggestions. And so we've had increased book interest in literacy. What they, you know, oh, you have a collection that I can check out and I can read in my cell. I don't have to read in the library. They have some preconceived ideas. And about, I'd say once a year, we have almost a complete new population. So that's an ongoing project. It's not like you tell them and then they stay the same population. There's always people coming and going. So it's really helpful to have a team of, I call them users, but that's an interesting word in prison, right? That could have a double entendre. So library patrons helping patrons, peer-to-peer advisory, right? So my senior started a docent program, and, you know, having an inmate that's a volunteer who has a sense of, I work at the library, I'm a volunteer, taking a day and helping that patron at the point of need. Maybe they want to do a particular thing. They want to find a bill and see if it's become a law and go on the Lexis computer, but they have no idea how to use a mouse. So that person has the time to sit down and, you know, let me tell you how to get to that point that you want to go, where a librarian or maybe even a library clerk would not have time. So asking people what they want, I know that sounds really simple, but really, I mean, sometimes it's as simple as that, finding ways to get users invested and feeling a sense of community with your library, and they will build it themselves. If you ask them, they'll come.
Ray, Aaron, any feedback? Any responses?
I just really like what I'm hearing. I mean, I think that the public librarians and the carceral librarians are going to take what we did in the standards and just expand it to the point where there's a real serious nationwide movement to provide library services to the incarcerated. That's what I'm hearing. I know a lot of people are in states that don't provide that, but there are others in states that are providing that. And I'm really encouraged.
And I would just say, as far as what Christina said and what Brandy brought up, especially in carceral libraries, making sure that your relationship with your administrative staff is there. I don't know, I'm not sure how it's set up in California. Florida has a warden and an assistant warden of programming, which tends to be over the library. And so you want to make sure, first and foremost, you have that good relationship. So when you have an idea of programming, that you're able to bring it up and you feel comfortable bringing it up with your assistant warden of programming or whoever may be the overhead of your department. I know Brandy's, you know, in the leadership position. Does she have that relationship with her leaders? So when you come to her with something, that she can fight for it and make sure that it happens. And then also, you know, when we talk about the connections for the library cards, you know, making that happen. Here in Florida, the reentry programming is, or reentry services, I should say, not really programming, is through a classification officer. So do you have, as a librarian, you know, a relationship with that side of things as well? There's a classification officer going to, you know, look up, you know, I know it brought up in the chat, you give an email address and they can tell you, you know, there's the library that you're going to be returning, you know, in the community that you're returning to. That should be a function of the prison that you're at. You know, whether it's coming from information that's provided by the prison librarian or your classification officer, that should ideally set you up for re-entry and re-assimilation into the community that you're returning to. So that is where we have to create these connections. You know, whether it's the public libraries connecting with the prison librarians, or they're connecting with the classification officers or an overhead classification officer, whatever the term may be for your particular system. And it, again, all has to do with the connections and the collaborations and the partnerships that we want to ideally have existing. Something that I advocate for, if anyone's ever heard me in other webinars, is, you know, and it's kind of what it says, pipeline to from prison to public. I want what I consider a continuity of service. What you had in the public libraries before incarceration should follow you through incarceration and then after. And so that, again, that all comes down to advocating for partnerships and collaboration between all library types and all levels of your administrations.
Before we go back to Michelle, there's something in the chat. Pam's made a contribution. I want to make sure we get into the recorded version here. Our county library is in the process of taking responsibility, and staff in our county jail's library, in addition to expanding the adult and family literacy program we already do, hoping to lay a pathway to our library and a general awareness of the kinds of resources that are out there. Again, I've got to move my chat so I can see the rest of this. It's not perfect, but it still could provide some usefulness. So again, we just need to be dreaming. We need to be working together. We need to be doing the outreach that Ray and Aaron and so many others have said in the conversation that we're having today. Michelle, let's go back to you.
Yeah, I really loved what Christine said about kind of like taking the decision making and gathering ideas from the people that we're trying to provide services to, whether that's in the public libraries or inside. And I'm wondering if, as those types of programs start, you're going to end up with a lot of folks re-entering who have really great information skills and may want to pursue careers in information like Ray's been able to do, who may not have had the education beforehand. And so I know that prison education programs exist, but I'm wondering if anyone knows of programs that are offering education inside, or if, Ray, you could speak to what would have helped you kind of get where you are in terms of support or access to education and professional opportunities.
Sure. I wanted to start out with there are more college programs beginning or continuing in carceral settings, and there's more of a movement to expand the relationship between the carceral institution and the academic institution offering the programs in college. That is essential. You know, you can't take college courses and not have access to college level resources. Most prison and most carceral institution libraries do not offer that level of support. So that's key. As more and more colleges and universities offer programs in carceral settings, then more relationships with the academic library will begin. As to what would have helped me, some rational support would have helped me. If I may tell you a story, I had completed all of the college work necessary to get an associate in science degree, and except for one course which required computers. The prison said that I couldn't go off campus to the institution to take a class to satisfy the. So I said, well, can you offer it here? No, there's nothing. The last day, the day I am leaving, the superintendent of that section came and said, would you still like to get that test? And I said, well, my head is already out of here. I said, but sure, I'll take it. So they set up a room and I went in and I took a test that had been provided by the instructor. And that's the last I heard of it for 2 years. And when I was getting ready to go back to UT, I needed the information. So I requested some information from the college, and they said, "Oh, well, you have your associate degree." And I said, "No, I don't." They said, "Well, it was awarded." I said, "Well, I never heard from you." And they said, "Well, you passed. You got an A on that test, so you should have your degree." And eventually they sent it to me. It took 2 years. That's because I persisted in getting that. So the cooperation of the education department and the prison administration is essential, because too often the incarcerated person doesn't know how to go about doing things. So I think that if they'd provided me more assistance, if they'd just let me go to the college and take the test, it would have done. So the breakdown is in communication. You can't an incarcerated person has not been outside for a long time to know what they need and what they're going to do. So you have to provide that communication level. I hope that answers your question.
As we get to the end of this, how would you summarize in 2 or 3 points the most important things you think people should remember as they walk away from this session in terms of advocating for the population we're talking about?
So first and foremost, just like, if you have the drive and the will to do something and advocate for something, always push forward for it. Don't, let barriers stop you. Find the ways around. I think what this session especially shows you, that you have a lot of people that are in the same, situation as you, that have the same thoughts and have the same wants and needs to advocate for this particular group of community members. So know that you're not alone. You have the access to people that are doing potentially what you want to do, and use their model and translate it to fit your needs. So that's first and foremost. Your advocacy is a group effort. Yes, you can do it by yourself, and know that it doesn't matter what position you are. There's plenty of frontline staff that may not have a degree or may not have the experience, but have the drive and the will to do so. So make sure that you're aware of the resources that are around you. I think a lot of people take for granted what they have access to, because either they're not aware, or they just don't think that maybe this is the pipeline that I could take to do what I want to do, to advocate, or to create the programming, or to create the connections and the partnerships that you want and need to make your ideas a reality.
I would encourage everyone to have a public library card in the city they live. That seems silly, but that's important. And once you get that card, or if you have it, go to your library and ask, what are you doing for the people in the local jail, prison, whatever? What are you doing for them? How can I help you get started? You might be surprised to find out how many people are interested in doing that, but you won't know until you ask. So the key is to go to the library. It's a great place to start, and ask, what are you doing? What can I do to help what you're doing? And then you'll get a group of people together and begin advocating for change if it's needed. Or you can go and support what programs they have going now. There are many programs that are viable, and all they need are volunteers. So you can become that, or you can become a leader in creating a program through the public library. If you can get a copy of the standards, then that'll give you some information. We have a Where It Works section in there, where people like the Queens Public Library and the New York Public Library and the San Francisco Public Library talked about programs they did for incarcerated people that worked, and you can learn from that. Or you can contact any of those libraries. Brooklyn, Queens, New York, San Francisco, St. Louis has some interesting programs. And those people can put you on to groups that are working to improve the resources for incarcerated people.
The most important thing we always do at the end of these sessions is to ask ourselves a question. What is one thing that we will do differently in the next week because we were part of this conversation? Is there a chance to share out those ideas, kind of recap what we gathered from the session, and also commit ourselves to saying we didn't just come to talk, we came to figure out what we can do as advocates to be better. So I pose that to you. You can put it into chat, unmute yourself, send carrier pigeons, whatever works for you. But what's one thing you're going to do differently in the next week because you were part of this conversation?
Randy.
Hi, I'm going to reach out to the folks that are in charge of our transitions program and make sure that they're inviting public libraries in the community to come and talk about kind of that library 101 that was mentioned earlier.
Wonderful. Thanks, Brandy. Anyone else?
Go ahead, Christine.
I'm going to buy a book. I'm going to go to the ALA. I know that sounds obvious, but I've always gone to the California Public Library. I've never gone to the ALA for a book. So that's a whole nother resource for me.
ALA Editions is a wonderful resource for all of us. We've got a couple comments in the chat. One person saying, think bigger, having a library in the new jail, which is fabulous. And another person saying, I want to suggest to my supervisor that we host a Library 101 class at our branch. Again, you don't have to create this from scratch. That link we have to the San Francisco Public Library program, they have on YouTube, I believe it's 10 videos that are how to train for the kind of programming that we're talking about here. So start with that and then see where that takes you. Other people, what are you going to do differently? Got another comment in here. I'm going to research a formerly incarcerated population that that the academic library I work at serves and see what resources we can make available. I believe there's one just before that. I'm spearheading a reference to my mail initiative for incarcerated people in New Jersey. I'm going to reach out to other librarians to gain a bigger driving force. Again, CLA, that's what we're all about and what every state library is going to be about. Reach out to your peers. Find comfort in the people that you know that can support your efforts and you can support them. Makes it easier, it makes it social, makes it fun, and it is productive. We're results driven. Any last comments from anybody?
Just one thing that was put in the chat, and that goes along with what Michelle was saying. The Prison Library Support Network does that. And if you, it was in the chat, I have to find it. But if you Google Prison Library Support Network, that is such a great resource, and they do provide reference services by mail. So you can volunteer to be part of that, and that might be a good starting point if you want to, when you're bringing it up in New Jersey. So yeah, and just another thing, you're always welcome to reach out to myself or Ray, I'm sure. I put our emails in the chat way up there, but we can have that sent out also. I'm available like all the time. So if you want a quick email back and forth or a quick Zoom chat, just to be a sounding board or anything, I'm sure I'm available for that.
I'm going to break Aaron's little secret here. He never sleeps. Contact him anytime.
I really don't.
And I benefit from that so many times. All right, everybody, thank you so much. Reminder that we do this every month and we can pull things together. We're looking forward in January to having Patrick Sweeney from Every Library back for the third time on an annual basis. He and I are still brainstorming the final content of that, but we're certainly going to be looking at unexplored things that we need to be looking at in advocacy from the Every Library point of view, from the legislative point of view, and looking toward what promises to be a very interesting and challenging year for all of us as we continue to struggle through the discord we have, the disagreements we have, but most importantly, finding solutions to our problems so we can go there. That'll be back to our regular schedule, which will be 10 a.m. Pacific time, second Wednesday of January. Thank you, everybody. Hope to see you soon. Those who still have questions they want to ask, hang. Aaron has to run off because he never sleeps. He's got another webinar that he's going on to as soon as this one ends. But Ray and I can hang for a few more minutes if you have any questions. With that said, take care. Have a wonderful day. And I'm going to give the official signal to Karen. We can stop the recording. Thanks, Karen.